Good evening, TNT family. We are fortunate to have Mr. Seereeram back with us again. And Mr. Seereeram made some very strong statements in his most recent article in reference to FCB hoarding our foreign exchange, especially the US dollar. So I also saw where he said that. The actions of FCB and the central bank is jeopardizing the government. So, Mr. Seereeram, I want to welcome you back to UNC USA, and if you could break it down to us, our ordinary people, to understand the terminology of your language in your article and what's taking place in the country and how it affects us as ordinary citizens in our daily lives with our banking business, whether we are doing it as an ordinary citizen or a business person. If you could break that down as to what you mentioned in this article for us, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Gary, for inviting me once more, and good evening to all the viewers and listeners. Um, you know, I've summarized Trinidad problems as being two. One is crime, which I'm not an expert on, but certainly I could see that there's significant need for improvement. And the second is shortage of FX. If you solve the FX problem by whatever means, there are a lot of ills in society will be corrected. And by that I mean it's a discussion for another time. But at the moment, our propensity to import is very high. I saw a recent schedule that states that Trinidad and Tobago, we import 90+ % of our food. In other words, without foreign exchange, we wouldn't, at the present time, we would not have money to buy food, and therefore we'll be in a critical position with regards to that. There are other items that we depend on for foreign exchange, and we have not moved away from oil and gas, though we have been talking about diversification for the last 50 years. And I'm seeing no signs of Trinidad and Tobago moving away because there are certain things that must be done by government, and that is not on the cards. And they're still looking to Venezuela, which there are serious political and geopolitical problems with that particular expectation. Um, so I can only see that the matrix, the indicators for Trinidad declining significantly. However, coming back to the banks, when I did my research, and I still have to do research on the insurance companies as well, because they also about a couple of years ago, the government allowed the insurance companies to hold up to 25% on the investments in external assets, in external US dollar assets or foreign currency. So it means to say when they move from 20% of their portfolio to 25%, that 5% differential would have a significant impact on the demand for foreign exchange for investments outside of Trinidad and Tobago. So that's another area that needs to be researched and to see what can be done. And my initial recommendations to the government via my articles is to reduce that from 25% to 15%. And that will generate a significant amount of US dollars for the ordinary citizens of Trinidad. Coming back to who is really suffering in Trinidad, it's the small and medium sized businesses and the individuals. Because when you go to FCB, if you do have the misfortune of going to FCB to ask for a little money to travel, they're giving you, I think, around $200. The question is, if you are hoarding over 1.1, $1.2 billion, is that all you're going to give your customers? $200 to travel, and then in the meantime, you would have cut the availability on your credit card. You cut there as well. So what has happened, and the law allows it, although I'm questioning the law because if you are acting not in the interest of the public, I think there are laws to deal with that. And that is where We need astute lawyers. That is where, and UNC and other opposition parties. I think they have access to tremendous, very good attorneys. They should look into this and see what is the legal position with regards to banks hoarding. But my view, hopefully, I've simplified a lot of it. There's no specific law to prevent a commercial bank from taking all their TT dollar deposit and buying up US dollar assets. So their books, then I explained in my article, their books you can easily see TT dollar liability by way of deposits, and you can also see US dollar assets by way of investments, except for the reserves that they have to pay into central bank has to be in TT dollars. So they can confiscate. They are in a very critical position in the supply chain, and they can actually hijack the industry for their selfish benefit. For their Because we ask the question, what is the benefit for them holding US dollars to such a large extent? And the benefit is very simple. With the US rates for US Treasury, I think it's about 4 or 5% that has been moving around, and you are paying less than 1% for TT dollar deposit. Then it becomes a zero risk, no capital required for government in securities, and you are making 3% on an overall portfolio of $60 billion. That's a lot of money. In fact, you only need just one branch and perhaps about 3 or 4 persons to operate that system. So I think I'm glad I did research it because I brought it to the fore. What is required now is public pressure via political parties, via the opposition, via the what you call the various chambers of commerce. All they have to do is write to FCB and say, please release those monies immediately. Release it immediately. It's causing undue pain for Trinidad and Tobago. So we have to see what sort of pain are they really causing. At the moment, a lot of the SMEs cannot get US dollars to operate their business. They cannot. And what you're going to find is greater and greater closures of businesses in Trinidad and Tobago. And the SMEs would be the first one to be affected by what is transpiring in Trinidad with the shortage of FX. If you go to the malls, you're going to see a lot of vacant places available for rent, but that is going to crash. I expected the crash to be long before now, but the trend is very, very clear that a lot of properties and so on are going up in the market. I was shocked, and I want to be very, very honest with this. I saw a 3-page advertisement by a mortgagee. I believe it is one finance company, one bank maybe, or HMB, the home mortgage bank, or whichever one, a lender with so many properties for sale all at one time. Generally, a bank will be very, very cautious and skeptical and reluctant to advertise their properties for sale because it shows now that they are in serious problems. It means that they would have been trying to sell these properties for years and not getting it sold, and at the end, throw it out in the newspaper and invite some fire sale. So these are not comforting trends for the overall economy of Trinidad and Tobago, and something has to be done quickly, very quickly. I don't know if you heard, Gary, that the UK has suspended all free travel from Trinidad and Tobago to the UK, that we have to get a passport.
I
And over
recently
the
saw
last,
that. I recently saw that. Go ahead.
right. So I don't know if you're probably old enough to know that in the 1980s, where there was a lot of refugees from Trinidad going to Canada, United States, and England, and so on. The 1980s. So in my view, we are going to experience something as harsh as the 1980s all over again. And those were not comforting times. They were not comforting times. with unemployment rate very high, economy down, and all sort of companies are closing shop. People are unable to get any kind of work, and I am not seeing any sign by the government to create any long-term employment by way of diversification of the economy. So, with that said, I think the first step is to make the banks sell out all their surpluses, sell it out, look at the insurance companies, bring down their surpluses, and I suspect we would have about two to 3 billion US dollars coming back into Trinidad. How important is 2 to 3 billion US dollars? We are importing food for the year about a billion US dollars. So that's 3 years supply of food. 3 years. We are importing overall on everything about $1 billion a month. So that's with
But
3 months of
Mr.
port.
Seereeram, we are
Yeah.
importing things that we can grow and manufacture within our country. That is something that we have to also take into consideration, right?
No, that is true. But that is where we have to ask the question, do we import more cars or do we import more machinery that will help us manufacture things? We always we make the claim that we don't have any raw materials beside grass and land and so on. But we are shipping out a tremendous amount of scrap iron. Now that can be utilized if you look in the poorer countries or developing countries, if you look at India, Pakistan, the Far East, Philippines, and so on. They use scrap iron to manufacture many, many things and many sophisticated things as well. So we can set up those industries, stop exporting all our raw materials, our scrap, and start putting that into manufacture of various products into Trinidad. And that we come back now. How do we identify what are the resources we have? How do we identify? And that is where we need a whole ministry for recycling to look at it in great detail. I had mentioned the last time, for example, 70% of the value of a car tire is the casing. So we can go back into manufacturing, retreading tires, and save a tremendous amount of foreign exchange. We can develop, as I have done, a small sugar factory. It was more a hobby than anything else, but I'm seeing it can be feasible to compete with imported jaggery. We can compete with imported Muscovado sugar. It's just to upscale a bit, and we can be self-sufficient on those things. And those are uh, known as a health sweetener, and therefore we have health advantages by using that instead of the refined sugar. So too many. I'm looking at the possibility of too many good opportunities for Trinidad and Tobago to be self-sufficient, and at the end of the day, distribute whatever wealth we have in such a manner that we can all have we can all lead a productive and happy life. So there are too many things to be done, and this is where the manifesto for the UNC, which I was proud to be invited to help prepare the 2015 manifesto. I've been looking to see the more recent one. I think the last time I broached that with you. Um, but that has to be a very, very serious document, like a contract now with the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. It has to be. But coming back to the hoarding by the bank, that's such a low hanging fruit.
But
We
all
can
of this is happening under the Minister of Finance watch. And basically, he responsible in that for that aspect of things with what the banks are doing.
That is correct, and they have been delinquent in their jobs, very, very delinquent, and we cannot afford it. We cannot afford ignorance. We cannot afford cowardice. We cannot afford people in positions that are not qualified. And the central bank governor, I remember he was called by the committee. There was a committee, parliamentary committee, And they asked him, can he do anything about the fees charged by banks? And he threw up his hand in the air and he said, no. Then what is he doing? We should shut down central bank, shut it down, like probably what Milei in Mexico has done. Just shut them down left, right, and center. They have no use. They are danger because you are expecting them to protect the population, and they are not doing that. So what are they doing? Should we put up a sign like the cigarette packet that when you enter a bank, enter at your own risk? I think we should. I think we should because I've been dealing with this matter for the last 25 years. After I left Citibank, I've been dealing with banking fraud and banking crime, and I've been writing about it. I showed you the article. I was featured in Times Magazine, etc. I did some lectures of the islands to the ministerial committee by the OECS countries, and I had stopped the use of the sinking fund bond, which Royal Bank was selling left, right, and center, misrepresenting the benefits of it. In fact, there were no benefits and significant pain and suffering that they brought onto the smaller islands. It's a Trinidad bank that bankrupt Belize, and people don't know it. But those stories have to be told. The Trinidad bank that bankrupt Dominica, they bankrupt Antigua. But the population, the governments in these regions, they don't like to deal with anything. They don't like to deal. They're just scared of dealing with these major issues. I'll give you another example. When FICO introduced that EFPAs, I think executive something, that was a deposit which should not have been allowed by the central bank. It was a deposit. They're not supposed to take deposits from the population without a bank license. I made that presentation to
So
senior officials.
basically, you could do anything in Trinidad
You
as you
could,
want,
yeah,
please, no
yeah, it's
regulation.
better. It's better when you're born. You're told like, look, you're on your own. You're on your own. The regulators are just there to fill their pockets by way of the perks and good salaries. And now I see the government has given themselves a raise in pension.
A drastic raise. No, no,
No, but I'm telling the population, if there's a new government, they can reverse to all those things. They can reverse it. They can reverse it. If government don't have money, sorry, I can't make the payment. In fact, there were two examples of this. Two examples. The Police Service Commission, I think re- they decreased their salaries. That is not sacrosanct. If salaries and pension not sacrosanct, that can always be changed. Those rules were made by man and women, and man and woman can change it. So what I think has to be done, and these are low hanging fruits, and I'm saying we can bring in about 2 to 3 billion when you bring in as well the life insurance companies. Let them bring back the money. But in the meantime, just don't take the money and spend it willy nilly. We have to reorganize society to meet our new reality. Right now, we have bought a ticket, and this is the analogy I'm using. We have bought a lottery ticket, and we start spending the winnings already. And I'm referring to Dragon Gas. I'm referring to Dragon Gas. They just said, hold on a while. The benefits of that particular transaction agreement with Venezuela is coming. But there's so many problems with it. So many problems with it. But we are foolish to be waiting on that. It means to say we have one egg in one basket. That's what Trinidad has become. It is not a question of eggs in a basket anymore. It's one egg in one basket. And that is how we are living day to day. We are borrowing money. Gary, this is another major problem. We
and
are
borrowing
borrowing,
against what? What are we borrowing against? What
right?
assets we have to borrow against?
It's a combination. It's a combination. You see, the banks are not always prudent. The banks are not, in fact, most of the banks are not prudent. And I'll explain that. Once they see the government, they look at government and say zero risk, we can lend. We can lend. The measurement they use is debt to GDP. which is a bogus ratio, is a bogus ratio, debt to GDP. I could debunk that. If you give me 5 minutes, I could debunk it. I could tell the World Bank, I could tell IMF, you all are using the wrong matrices. Wrong. Totally wrong. I'll bet my house on that. I'm the only one who's saying this song. Only one. I've had discussion, heated discussions with economists and so on. And we are just using the wrong matrices to drive government and country policies. And therein lies the problem. So the banks are reckless because these officers, once they are able to close a deal with a country, they get their bonuses and they walk. They walk. So all these countries using the wrong matrices to measure their capacity to borrow are, are quickly, some of them quicker than others, are walking towards the edge of the cliff. They're walking to the edge of the cliff. If you look at Europe, all those countries have overborrowed and they cannot meet their interest payments. When a borrower cannot meet their interest payments, when a borrower has to borrow money to meet its interest payments, they are called ghost companies, ghost institutions. They only live by the grace of debt, and Trinidad has fallen into that trap. They have fallen into that trap. So whichever government gets into power, let's say UNC gets into power, they have to be very cautious and do a full audit. So whatever promises they are going to make now about opening up the so many more schools, opening up the hospitals and giving pay rise to police and all of that, they have to be cautious. If you follow the events in the UK, Starmer has fallen into that trap. The difference with Starmer and I believe the UNC will not make a promise if they know they cannot keep it. But in the case of Starmer, recordings have shown that they know they could not keep these promises about reduction in taxes and so on, and they said it on tape. They know they can't keep it, but let's fool the population, and that is why he's the most slowly hated and despised prime minister the UK government has had within recent history. So we have to be cautious because people in the UK, you notice, they are taking to the streets. They are taking to the streets. So we have to be very cautious, level with the population as to the state of the financial affairs, see what we can do and can't do. Somebody has to implement austerity measures. And you start by leadership saying, look, I'm taking a 20% cut in my salary. And these are the things we are going to do to bring about a more equitable society. This is how we're going to create jobs, sustainable jobs, as you're fully aware in terms of a proper diversification, food security, food food processing, agro processing, and so on. So there are some good opportunities for us to live within our means, and we have to address the crime, but we also have to. One of the major reasons for difficulties and problems in society is disparity of earning. And like with the FCB, some of these senior managers could be earning 150,000 TT to 200,000 TT when you consider all the perks. And this is how they're blowing up Trinidad and Tobago. So there could be limits on all of these things as well. I've worked, let's say, 20 years in the banking sector. And the real innovation comes when you're able to circumvent rules within the boundaries of the law. Within the boundaries of the law. How can you avoid taxes in a legal fashion? Um, and the banks have been doing these things even if it is not legal. They have been avoiding taxes or evading taxes on many, many transactions. Um, that when I discovered, I brought it to the attention of ministers in the previous UNC government, but they were not prepared to deal with issues. They were not prepared. I showed them. Let me ask you something, and your listening audience, your viewing audience.
This is nonsense.
When, Gary, when there's an interpretation that if Trinidadians invest in a government of Trinidad and Tobago bond, they receive interest rates on which they have to pay taxes on, which is normal.
Okay, I'm
However,
listening.
however, the banking sector, with their advisors and so on, have advised the banks that if you invest in a CARICOM country like Jamaica government bonds, that is tax free. You could explain that to me? Aren't you encouraging flight of capital from Trinidad?
Exactly. Seems so. And we have Nadina with us here. Nadina, feel free to jump in also. Okay.
Hi, yes, I just needed to
Yes,
lower the good evening everyone. Good evening, Vade. I just needed to
yes,
move away
good evening.
from the television. So just bear with me.
Yeah, sure, thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Seereeram. We're listening to you.
So, okay, this has started in the early 2000s. Royal Bank was a major culprit, Royal Bank, and they were paying taxes of less than 10%. And when you look at the reason why, is because they would set up two companies, one in Jamaica, one in Trinidad. The Jamaican company will invest in Trinidad and Tobago bonds, and they will record it as tax free in Jamaica. The Trinidad Royal Bank would invest in Jamaican bonds and record it tax free here. Now, so we have a Trinidad company with an exposure to Jamaican dollars. Am I right? Following so far?
Yeah, we're listening.
Okay. So they have an exposure in Jamaican dollars, and their Jamaican counterpart will have an exposure in Trinidad dollars. So there's a currency risk. So they cover that risk by an artificial swap between Trinidad Royal Bank and Jamaica Royal Bank. So effectively, they're able to cheat both governments of taxes and record those investments as tax exempt. Now, this has gone on, and I don't know, it might be still be going on. I've kind of lost track of these things, but it has to be investigated. So in 20, let me see, sometime between 2010 and 2015, I put together a team um, that we could have addressed this. And at that point in time, Trinidad was short. We lost in taxes about $6 to $7 billion. $6 to $7 billion. So we come back to the issue. What was the Minister of Finance doing at the time? What was the Minister of Finance? What was the central bank governor doing at the time? These are huge risks that the banks are taking onto themselves, because if the law is that that is not allowed, although they interpret it that way, they could have lost their franchise, could have lost your capital. So the banks have been engaged in very risky business, and the government and I don't know if, even if it is brought to their attention, they're not prepared to do anything. Which comes back to what is the purpose of government? And if you look at all the ministers when they are sworn in to hold up the constitution and serve the constituents. They are, so they're in breach of their duties right away. A legal breach, in fact, in my view, because a manifesto is a very serious document. A manifesto and the constitution is very serious. So the countries have been losing a lot of money, and I think all those things should be addressed. With regards to the Citibank deal, that was in 2000, 2000, let me see, 19, no, that was in about 1995. Now, fraud has no statute bar. Fraud has no statute bar. You could imagine applying compounded interest to that. But you need very good lawyers. You need very good financiers who could understand the issues and explain it very cogently, very clearly to the attorneys, who can articulate then a case against these institutions and get back the money. Get back the money. There's a lot of money to be gotten back from the banking sector and probably the insurance sector as well. So you've asked the question, what is the, and I've also asked the question on this simple matter of hoarding, what is the central bank governor doing? He should be fired immediately. Immediately. The Minister of Finance should be fired as well, and put people of competence in those positions who can protect the citizens, the citizens' right to those very assets that are being stolen away from them. Let's look at the implication of hoarding. Let's look at the implication for hoarding. Let's say an insurance company has $1 million US dollars to pay the reinsurers to operate their business. They cannot get that. Ultimately, they'll have to close up shop. Whilst FCB has 1,000 of those $1 million parked away, they are sitting on it, doing nothing. They are just waiting for a devaluation to record a massive profit, and that's it. That's it. So so the true beneficiaries of all this US dollars, they are unable to access it, and slowly, like nine pins, one by one, they're going out of business. They're going out of business. Now, what is very, I would say, perhaps not so surprising, but this has been brought to the attention of all the chambers of commerce. Why aren't they picketing FCB now and say, guys, can you please release that $1 billion so that we can continue to exist? The chambers of commerce. My understanding is they went to the Minister of Finance. The Minister of Finance says, sure, we'll establish a Chinese fund. A Chinese fund for what? In one, you still have to pay it back. You still have to pay it back. They established another fund for exporters. Our exporters bringing back the money. Nobody is monitoring it. All these things should be reported at least half yearly or quarterly Parliament, to Parliament, so that all the parliamentarians could understand the basics of these things, what is the mechanics of it, and whether such a strategy is working to the benefit of the ordinary people of Trinidad. We need very bright people to run the country. We need very bright people to run the country who understand the nuances of finance, who understand the nuances of investment, who understands money. We need that. Who understands accounting.
Not only bright, Mr. Seereeram, we need people who are committed to country and people, because some people are committed to their own greed, and these are the things we have to be careful with.
Right. Now, you could have very committed people, and let me tell you, once they start dealing with international banks and local banks, if they are not up to speed to understand the tricks of the trade, they will lose billions of dollars, billions of dollars. I'll give you a story. There was a ministerial committee set up by the UNC. By the UNC are very bright people, supposedly bright people. I wouldn't call names, but there were about 6 of them. Ministerial committee. They went to a presentation by a Miami investment bank. Miami investment bank, who said, we will lend you whatever money you want, and we'll lend you extra, and we'll set up a sinking fund, a sinking fund that will mature in 10 or 15 years to pay back the principal at maturity. So all government has to do is pay interest. But that's a farce by itself. That is just a repackaged mortgage payment facility where you record interest payments, but included in that interest payment, there's an element of principal. Okay. But when they were making the presentation, I only asked, actually government was gun ho on signing off that deal and paying off the depositors at Pico and etc. etc. I asked a very simple question: in what investments are you going to use that sinking fund to invest in what? And the second question I asked: at what rate do you expect? Their answer was also very straightforward. And if you didn't know, you would have accepted it. They said they're going to invest it in US Treasuries. And the rate they were expecting, 9%. Gary, the rate at the time for US investment was less than 3 or 4%. But they are telling the government, and the government believing them, they're going to get 9%. After the meeting, I told the ministerial committee, do not touch that at all. Do not touch it at all. There's serious risk. So you could imagine if they had done the deal, what they would have found out was the sinking fund is not performing as the investment bank said it would perform at 9% compounded per annum. And therefore, at the end of the 10 years, government would have to fork out a tremendous amount of money from their own pockets to meet the principal payment. In the meantime, the investment bank, they're collecting money for structuring the transaction, and also they're collecting their monthly fees for managing the sinking fund. So, when something happens like this, government realize, look, they are caught into a transaction that they should not have done. But to admit that, they can't admit that to the public. So they generate a series of ideas working with the investment bank to bluff the population as to why it was a good deal. Why it was a good deal. So, if you do not have very sharp people, that's why I mentioned sharp. Yeah, first you have to be sharp, and hopefully you'll be honest. But just being honest is not good enough. You have to be very sharp in terms of finance to walk away, discuss it in your little camera committee, and say, guys, we are not going with it. We are not going with it. So I just hope that the cadre of advisors just doing an MBA or doing some your ACCA doesn't make you qualified to be a minister of finance. You have to have walked the street, understand how investment banks work, how normal bank works, and you have to have a good idea of the legal aspects of banking, legal aspects of finance, and bring all those what I would call knowledge to bear in performing your function, performing your function,
The
because
line
there'll
of
be a lot.
communication has to be open. It can address this job with arrogance. That's what I see happening, and that's why one of the reasons for their downfall is they know it all, and
They know.
you have to be in touch um, with the various sectors of our country in a various division. As I see it, you could tell me if I'm right or wrong because you're more experienced than me. I'm just giving my idea how I see things should be done. And I think you have to be in communication with the various categories of the population, business sector, and get a feel, a better understanding of things. You just can't go in there like you know it all at all. So I don't care how much degree somebody has. You have to be in communication.
You have to listen. You have to listen. You have to take your knocks when you're wrong and be humble enough to say, look, I'll correct my ways going forward. So you have to listen to people. And there are a lot of very bright people in Trinidad, very, very bright. I interact with some of them. Um, but you as a leader, you have to know who you can trust and who you can't trust. Now, one of the things as a leader, you have to, before you bring somebody in the inner circle that you trust, that you will lay your trust on, you have to test them as you go along, and be willing to discard them when you see something suspicious. So a great a great requirement of a leader is the ability to put together a team that will work and coordinated and work towards the same goal. And this is where, when you have people who are, as you mentioned, who are dishonest and looking after their own interests, you should be able to detect that very quickly and discard them, move them
Yeah,
out.
we need the proper checks and balances, and we don't see that happening. I mean, in various ministries and sectors of the country. You've seen like everyone operating their own shop. Even within the police force, you've seen that sort of thing taking place. And you don't see any proper management and directives taking place. Nobody's addressing the issues as things become knowledgeable to us. We don't see that kind of forceful enforcement taking place. If someone makes a complaint, nothing is done as usual.
Right. So you set up simple reports to deal with those issues. For example, how many cases before the court, let's say for murder, how many cases? And what when you do an aging of those cases, a guy is in jail for 10 years and his case has not been resolved as yet, something is wrong. So management by data is extremely important. And now we have all the computers and so on. You can just go in and get it. And that's what Elon Musk and they are doing. He hired six very bright, young uh, people, persons who are very bright and who could extract data very quickly and figure out what is going on, what is wrong here, there, and everywhere. And that's what they're doing. So how long we talking about digitization. I'm not too sure if I'm pronouncing that correct, but at the moment, I am telling you, before, let's say, when I was doing my first degree, I was in mid 70s. You could have gone and gotten a lot of data from the CSO. Now you don't even know where the CSO is. If you look on the internet for information, you can't find it. So I think we have digressed significantly from 30, 40 years ago. And quite frankly, I would describe Trinidad as a leaf falling in autumn, just falling wherever the wind blows, it goes, and that's it. That's it. So
Hi,
we have to
Vade.
take back.
Hi, Gary.
Yes, sorry,
Hi.
go ahead, please.
Yes, it's Nadina.
Hi.
Good night to everyone. You mentioned a little while ago.
Nadina, you coming in very low. I don't know. Someone
Okay.
adjust your mic.
Just tell me if this is better, Gary. Any
Much
better?
better. Excellent. Excellent. Go ahead.
All right. Um, we spoke about the $1 billion hoarding and who should be
It went back
responsible
low again. It went back low
and,
again.
and who should be responsible or who should be held accountable. Wade, and you identify the Minister of Finance and you identify the central bank governor. Am I correct in saying that?
Oh, I'm also identifying senior management and the board of FCB.
Right. Okay. Two of those positions or characters that you mentioned were also involved in some way, directly or indirectly, with the issue regarding the Auditor General. And that would be the central bank governor as
Mhm.
well as the Minister of Finance, right? Those are the same two characters, the same two positions right now that you are pointing to. We have a situation where that is before us, where the Privy Council itself called for an investigation into the Minister of Finance regarding that particular matter. So, if we as a country going ahead business as usual under these circumstances where your highest court have has basically directed or subtly directed you that certain things are awry with respect to your financing and accounting, where does this lead us with respect to what you have just pointed out? Also, so if you can respond to that, but also I just want to raise one more issue. We are talking about um, FCB, Republic Bank, and those let's call them legacy banks that have been around
Mhm.
in Trinidad for some time, right?
Mhm.
But we had a recent bank that got introduced on our financial landscape um, when this government came into power. And it has to do with, and we understand that a minister of energy, soon to be minister, prime minister designate, and all these different connotations. His brother is associated with this bank that we never heard about in Trinidad, all of a sudden appears in Trinidad, has a low asset base, and has been given quite a number of projects. And loans have been taken out from this bank to the tune of billions of dollars, such that the asset base has grown. I mean, to significant amounts within a short period of time. Where are we with respect to that type of behavior? If there's anything untoward, is there something that needs investigating, or is it something normal in the financial sector? As a citizen, I would like to know.
Right. So the first question, the question is who's responsible for all of this? And this is where the laws can be introduced in Parliament. My understanding is that even the opposition has an opportunity to bring to introduce to Parliament some kind of laws every now and then. Am I right or wrong? So they can bring laws to be debated, bring the bill to be debated. That's one issue. But coming back now, I think the country should be angry enough to demand that the Minister of Finance resign and the central bank governor resign, as well as all the directors of FCB and the senior management resign as well. I was hoping that the chambers of commerce who's deprived of US dollars would take some initiative and write to these people. I can write to them. In fact, my article is effectively I'm writing to everyone in the nation. But if if we are so subdued, then and we're not prepared to get up and demand for what is ours, then nobody's going to do it for you, Nadina. Nobody's going to do it for you. So if they are not angry of this expose, then that's it. I could write to the central bank and tell the governor, look, just get this thing going and instruct the banks to only only keep a balanced book, a zero. Bring back all this money effectively. That was my recommendation in the first article. So I am thinking that the SMEs, if they are so scared, this world does not does not reward people who are scared to stand up. Eh? You have to stand up. There's nothing, there's nothing will be given to you. You have to demand what is your right. You have to demand what is owed to you. And I think this is where the opposition has a golden opportunity to bring these matters to a head because they have access to a tremendous amount of lawyers and so on. And that's why in this last article I said hoarding is against public interest. In other countries, the hoarding against specific items is not allowed. For example, hoarding of foodstuffs such as rice, sugar, oil, onion, garlic, etc. is against. It's not allowed. There's a law, specific law. But in our case, if you hoard US dollars, it's equivalent to hoarding everything else because we depend on US dollars for imports. So this is a very serious matter. I was so glad that I think uh, Kamala had mentioned, the leader of the opposition mentioned that she's going to set up a commission of inquiry into the banking sector. Am I right?
I think that was mentioned in the last, most recent
Right. So we have to get
meeting. Yeah.
serious about it. We have to get serious about it. So let's say as soon as they win, set up that commission of inquiry. I have
But
done,
you
I
know,
told
the
you,
population silence is what's causing the encouragement for what's going on to be happening. You know, and to continue.
that is correct. That is correct, Gary. And I'm saying, there's a politician in South Africa, and she say, unless you set fire behind somebody's backside, they don't move. And what has happened in Trinidad? You see, a middle class society is scared. They will talk among each other at the little get together and meetings when they're having their little parties and their barbecue and so on. But they're scared to to mention any issues outside of that. And my
But
word for
then,
it is they suffer.
Gary, to add to
Sorry,
that point, I mean, it's not
please.
just the population. I mean, even if the population is scared, we should have a robust enough media that could stand up in its role and its responsibility as the fourth estate. But our media seems to be a party group for the prevailing government. And that has been a major contributor to the decline and the collapse of the democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. They pander, they they shape their articles, their editorials, their headlines to favor and to meet the needs of the rule and dictatorial government. And therein lies the failure of our democracy. Those who are sworn and who are there to protect it are not doing their responsibility, because there are checks and balances in a democratic society. And one of the checks is the fourth estate. And that has been, and as a citizen of a country, in my mind, they need to, some charges need to be brought against them for their failure in performing that role, given the legitimate expectation of such entity in a democratic society.
Right.
So, gentlemen,
Yeah.
I do
Those,
have to take my leave shortly, but I wanted to mention that in light of what you all are speaking about. So I'll stay on for another 2, 3 minutes, and I'll have to leave shortly. Sorry about
yeah.
that.
Yeah. What happened that, let me explain that. You see, a middle class society that enjoying a fairly good standard of living and so on, they are not prepared to what they are looking for is what can they get from the country, what can they get from society, and they are happy with that. It comes a time, like in the 70s, when most of the population were in the poorer class, or the less than lower middle class. At that point in time, you have nothing to lose, and things tend to happen then. The other issue that I see happening is that I don't know if you're following in the UK, where the court ruled against Starmer, because Starmer was going off on a rump of his own and trying to renegotiate back to be bodies with the European Union, and the court said no. I said they told Starmer he's acting beyond his mandate. He cannot do that, and anything that he recommends to Parliament, that's coming to Parliament, he must do an impact assessment. Now that is critical, because I'm coming now to the situation happening in Trinidad. It seems to be that the government already preordained that they're going to give the Petrotrin refinery to a particular Nigerian outfit. And this is where now, if there's no proper procedures, and the Ms. Prasad Biswas says right, if there is no proper procedures, that decision can be overturned. And she already made that notice, gave that notice to the company, and to the company that is the preferred bidder at this point in time. You must have proper procedures. Now, even if the procurement legislation is weak here, there, and everywhere, even if it is weak, a government is still owes it to the population to exercise prudential guidelines whenever they're selling or buying anything. So, regardless of the legislation, they must follow proper prudential guidelines. And this is where that Trinidad has been losing a lot of money, losing because there's too much power given, assumed by the prime minister. They assume that they have too much power, and they short circuit things. And if we believe the article in the Sunshine by the Ken Ali, Ken Ali said this thing was already decided long ago, and he left the civil servants to just make it happen. And that is the modus operandi of the government within the recent times. And I'm saying all of that needs to be challenged. All of that needs to be challenged, because the other point. I agree with Nadina that look, that things happen in a society where the media will take a particular slant for their own survival and their own revenue generation from advertisements, etc. But it comes a time in the economic life of a nation, where things get so hard that the old order no longer applies. Now, we can ask the question, in the 1980s, those of us who went through the 1980s, I used to manage the auto industry at Scotia. In one year, in 1982, demand for vehicles was over 20,000 vehicles. Over 20,000 vehicles. The next year, 1983, when the recession hit, it fell below 5,000. Which industry could really survive such a massive decline? And there were lots of closures. At that time, Trinity Motors went bankrupt. Then Ford, Ford under McInerney Alston went bankrupt. So there were lots of closures at that point in time. And the amount people were giving up their houses, handing back the keys to the banks. And I'm seeing that happening today. Now, I'm seeing it happening now. Just the other day, there were 3 pages, full pages of advertisement by mortgagees on properties. And I looked where the locations of the properties were. And they were all over Trinidad. So it's probably assuming there was one mortgagee. I assume it would have been a commercial bank. Now, commercial banks, the very nature, they hate putting out an ad for a sale. They hate putting it for the simple reason it gives the population, it exposes their portfolio to the population that things are not well. Things are not well. It exposes their weak balance sheet to the regulators that things are not well. And for this now to come out in such a, I think, an open method, open, that they're willing to sell probably maybe 50 of the properties that they have a mortgage on. It means to say that things are not very good for the banks, not very good for the bank. And these are all signs with weakening economy. And despite the announcement by the government and central bank that look, things are turning around, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and all of that. All of that is false information and does not reflect reality on the ground. I think there's need for a change of government because this government has failed. There's no, I'm quite open in saying that. Um, and I think there's a need for a new government, and the new government has to understand what they're going to face when they come into power. What are they going to face? There's some low hanging fruits that can be done. And with a proper plan, I think Trinidad will be in a good position because we have a tremendous amount of infrastructure already developed in Trinidad. So we don't need more infrastructure. We don't need more commercial buildings. We don't need more factories. We don't need more um, uh, even housing. There's a tremendous amount of housing in Trinidad. It's a question of proper distribution. So, Gary, I think I've spoken a lot. Oh, by the way, point Lisa, the, the companies operating in Point Lisas are running out of gas. So they are not operating at 100%, way below 100%.
And that
That
is
could be
something we're going to have
confirmed.
to look into also, you know.
Please, yeah. Because you see, without that government, without taxes from the oil and gas sector, government is real spooked. They're real spooked because they don't know how to bridge the gap, the deficit. And for years, I'm saying they're misrepresenting the level of the deficit because they don't include the principal payment, which is about 5 to 6 billion a year. So whenever they tell you, I've raised issue on this, Gary, and for years now I've been raising issue, and the government has been playing hide and seek. Some years they will give you the caveat when they tell you this is the revenue, this is the expenditure. Some years they'll put the caveat saying minus this is the expenditure net of capital repayment. Some years they don't put that caveat. So they're trying to bluff the population again, and
They're playing games with the books, and
they're
this is
playing
what we
games with the
see.
books. Yes,
This is why we see the fiasco with the Auditor General taking place, and input trying to say, "Oh, no, there's no money missing." They're playing the games with the books, and we see that, and then we need to backtrack with the books, and get a better explanation of what really has been taking place with the population. First of all, we have to keep. We're not going to get the media in TNT to do this. We have to drive this on social media.
that is correct. That
We
is
have to
correct. Now,
educate the people. We need people like yourself who can bring that information, to us, to give us an understanding. And sometimes we would have to reiterate it because they don't sink in the first time. And so we need to keep reiterating these things, educating the population what the realities, why they are in a situation where they are. And you can expand on that for us a little bit.
well, the books have been cooked for years, and this is a legacy of British accounting, legacy of British accounting. Because understate your deficit, when you understate your deficit, and you explain in your budget that you're going to borrow money to that extent, let's say a 5 billion deficit, they disclose that. When the true deficit is more like $11 billion, $11 billion. And that is why I've spoken for years. I've spoken to the opposition, senators and so on, and they raise it. They sometimes raise it, but knowledge is one thing, but having the confidence that you know is a different matter. Because these smart men are able to throw spokes in the wheel, and then you start to fumble, and then realize, wait a minute, I perhaps I don't know what I'm saying. Perhaps Mr.
But
Siram don't know what he's saying.
But when the information is brought in the parliament by our senators and MPs, and the population don't stand with them on these things, it's like it's taken. It's like a leader or a chief with no Indians, basically. So because the people has not backed up that fight, so we need to work on that.
Right. So I think, I mean, I spoke to a few of the senators for several years, but I don't think they're confident enough to really hold on like a tiger. Yeah. Once you get a point, you have to hold on like a terrier till it is resolved. You don't give up. You don't give up. And I think that is a strategy that the UNC must adopt. You have a point, hold on to it till it's resolved, and then you could move on to another point. But what happens in Trinidad, you might hold on to a point for once or twice, and that's it. That's not good enough. You have to hold on, let me tell you. Particularly if it's one of national interest, that it impacts on so many things. Your deficit, many times I've written for the government to take back their budget, take it back. If they were presenting that budget to, let's say, a board on the private sector, the first thing you say, okay, how did you arrive at this deficit? Why is your expenditure net of? Why is your expenditure net of capital repayment? Add back your capital repayment and come back. Go back, take away your budget and go and revisit it, revise it, and come back with accurate numbers. Parliament has to be confident to tell the government, whichever government is there, to tell them come back with accurate figures. Otherwise, you're debating something that is totally false and irrelevant. Irrelevant. Because if you cannot find an additional $5 billion to meet your expenditure, tell me which expenditure you're going to cut and how are you going to determine which ones to cut. So this is a very important matter that has not been resolved in Parliament, despite me raising it over the last at least 5 years. I've been raising it at least 5 years, and worse yet. And this is where the other problem lies. All our bright uh, graduates and commentators and so on didn't pick it up. They didn't pick it up. Now, if I was wrong, listen, I wish I don't have a problem being proven wrong. I'll go in the wilderness for 14 years. I don't have a problem. But I've
But
been
look
raising
at the
these issues.
information. Look at the information in your most recent article that you brought. Things that affect us directly. Don't we seem to get it?
Well, if I was the SMEs and the Chamber of Commerce, I'll say, Mr. Sriram, could you explain this for me, or are you BSing us, or are you misleading the nation? Show me. I spoke to a few of them. Listen, if if they cannot stand up for their own right, then they deserve what they get. It's as simple as that. You deserve what you get. If you want to close up your shop, you can't get FX. And Gary, this has been going on for years. People can't get FX for simple things like importation of boutique clothing
especially
and
under
so
a
on.
PNM government. It always happens like that.
Yes, yes, and they're not prepared to stand up as a I don't understand. I mean,
I don't know
I
if I have to get Marshall Montano and some steel band and to get them out to come out and support the fight for their own selves, because I mean I mean this is very disturbing for me looking at this, the kind of information you brought forward here. I have been hearing about issues, but when you break it down to the way that you did, that is something that we have to all be concerned about.
well, this is what I hope the UNC can bring this to the platform and deal with it. I am willing to talk about these issues for the simple it affect all of us. Just imagine you going to a bank and they're giving you 200 to go away and they cut your limit on your card. Now, I had a very interesting experience. We had to go to India. I mean, I don't care to travel again. I've traveled a lot, but we had to go to India for my daughter's marriage. So I went to my bank, FCB, and I said, "Look, I'd like to get a credit card, so just for the month." So they interviewed me and they said, "No, you're over 70. They can't give it to me." So that left me wondering, when you reach 70, do they pull away the cards from their customers? So all these things have to be addressed.
Yeah,
All these things have,
there has to be representation here, and these information needs to be out in the public domain. There has to be some kind of organizational structure where we are representing these issues. I mean, the complaints go, and most of the time, what people don't know, the things happen to them, and they don't really know which way to turn. That's
well,
why we don't hear about these things, because there is not no structure in place, to really address it. And you might complain, and they will say, "Well, what is the use?" Because all the big boys have the government and all the forces on their side. So you really don't have that kind of support that you really
well,
need there.
this is why I was very pleased. I mean, since 2007, I telling Mr. Pandey, bring these things on the platform. Deal with the banks. I'll work with you all and deal with it. So I'm glad that uh, Ms. Prasad Bisesa said that they're going to put together a commission of inquiry into the banks. But what are you going to inquire about? You have to be very well informed, very well educated about the issues that you're going to bring forward to the population.
Well, there has to be an intelligence gathering team where you start to collect information. So as we hit government, we will be able to hit the ground running on the issues.
Well, I've done my work over the last 25 years, and I have everything documented. Like, would you believe the banks are still using add-on rates? Add-on rate is one of the biggest hoax in the world. Add-on rate that was discovered by Canadian bankers. It's illegal in Canada, but they're still following it up here. They're still doing it here. I made a big issue of it, and they said, okay, they're not going to do it again. But the amount of changes I've made to the banking sector, you cannot leave supervision. You cannot leave gaps in supervision because they go back. It's like waves. Soon as you turn your back, it comes back. They come back and doing it. So what you need is strict laws and a very astute central bank and regulators. Look, we have a regulator, Gary, concerning repos. I don't know if you're familiar with repos.
No, no, no,
It's
I'm not
a
familiar, but you can
it,
inform us on it.
it's part of a shadow banking. Shadow banking. So soon as you talk about shadow banking, you know something is wrong. When things happening in the shadows, it's usually evil. Usually evil. So in our shadow banking, the non-bank financial institutions have found a way of raising deposits and giving loans by way of repos and reverse repos. When you look at it, first of all, to repurchase something, you have to have a sale. The sale is never consummated. When I did a 2-day lecture at Federal Reserve Bank in New York, and this came up, and I said, guys, you all understand what you all are doing, and I didn't get a confident response that they fully understood what repos were. But those are trillion dollar, what you call products, trillion-dollar repos. And if you don't understand a transaction, you cannot rule on it. If you don't understand a transaction, you cannot rule on it. So even if you go to the lawyers, attorneys, you have to break that down in very simple components so that they can say, okay, I understand the transaction now. Let me build a case for it. Let me build a case for it. And we don't have that level of knowledge at our regulators. We don't. So there's a lot to be done. There's a lot of education to take place. What I'm speaking about, you're not going to find it at Harvard. You're not going to find it at any of the big universities. You're not going to find it at UWE. This is from practical experience.
Check your mic. The volume went a little bit low with you. I don't know what happened there.
Ah, yeah. What I'm saying that if you need people who have walked the street to fully understand the nuances of these transactions and the legal aspects and the moral aspects of it, to see how you can articulate a position to bring about change. To bring about change. And what has to happen? The government has to hire persons in the know so that they can detect any transaction, financial transactions that will not bring about benefit to the country. Because all I've seen, I really wish I had the patience and the time to put together a book on all the transactions that I've researched, investigated, so that it can give practitioners things what they should avoid, what they should avoid. So I need to complete that book. I hope God gives me life to do so. Well, Gary, I've spoken a lot. I'll be open to questions from anyone.
Well, anytime that you have something that you want to bring across to the population, this channel is available to you. Just give me a holler and we will, take care of that. So with that, I want to thank you for taking the time for joining us tonight. And if there's anything additional that you would like to add, please feel free to do so.
Well, I've spoken enough. As I said, I'll repeat. Glad that the opposition is willing to take on the banks and establish a commission of inquiry or something. A lot of the work has been done. So the commission of inquiry that should be implemented on day one, the first week. That's number one priority. For the simple reason, as I mentioned, there are two issues that Trinidad has to face. Priority: one is crime, and the second is shortage of FX. Yeah, hello.
Okay, Mr. Seereeram, thank you very much for joining us. And I'm also interested in you showing us your farm and what you've been doing there. So let me know which day you can do that and give us a little introduction
Well, what
to the.
we normally grind and make sugar and syrup and so on a Saturday or during the week. But I don't know. When will you be coming to Trinidad?
So I will make arrangement with you on that. So again, thank you very much, and I want to thank our listeners for joining us. And with that, I will say good night.
Yeah. Good night. Good night to everyone. Thank you. Thanks again for inviting me.